Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining me. This is the podcast, The Endurance of Labor Laws. I'm your lovely host, Lesley Sullivan, and today is episode 119, and we're going to take a look at the International Longshoremen's Association. Now, we have discussed a different longshoremen's union in times past, but this one is different. So this is very interesting because the longshoremen's, from what I understand, there are different unions that popped up at different times, depending on what was going on within the labor force, and also what particular industry they were transporting goods and things like that. So we're going to dive into this one. So let's take a look at. It was founded in 1892. It is headquartered in North Bergen, New Jersey. It has locations in the United States and Canada, so that's why it is an international union. So this one is truly an international union, so it's not name only. They actually do have offices in Canada. In terms of membership, as of 2019, they have 65,000 members. That's quite a few. Their membership has gotten as high as 100,000 people, which is very interesting to have that many. Let's see, their president is Harold J. Daggett, D-A-G-G-E-T-T. They have affiliations with the AFL-CIO, the CLC, and the ITF. It says here, the International Longshoremen's Association, also known as ILA, is a North American labor union representing longshore workers along the east coast of the United States and Canada, the Gulf Coast, the Great Lakes, Puerto Rico, and inland waterways. The ILA has approximately 200 local affiliates in port cities in these areas. A little bit of its origins. It says in 1864, the first modern longshoremen's union was formed in the port of New York City. It was called the Longshoremen's Union Protective Association. While longshoremen in the United States had organized and conducted strikes before there was a United States, the ILA traces its origin to a union of longshoremen on the Great Lakes. The Association of Lumber Handlers, founded in 1877, then renamed the National Longshoremen's Association of the United States in 1892. So this one goes back quite a ways. It joined the American Federation of Labor in 1895 and renamed itself the International Longshoremen's Association several years later when it admitted Canadian longshoremen to membership. Now, I still do have a concern with that because, we are not one big country. We are a big continent per se, but we are not, I don't want to say in collusion because that's a negative word. What is the right way to word this? I get concerned with international unions and associations because people tend to view the United States as their personal piggy bank. And we do not have the same type of government as Canada. We do not have the same type of health care. And we do not look at things similarly. So I think we need to be careful who we associate with. So that's one reason why I get concerned with international labor unions or organizations, because they tend to be, whenever they get the United States to join, they're not trying to become American. Not trying to have democracy or freedom or capitalism. They almost always want us to become like them, which is to be, in the European sense, socialist or fascist, and I guess Unitarianism, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and that's not the American way. The reason why the United States is so successful is because we're different than all the other countries. We were never part of Europe in terms of a monarchy, in terms of having a king or queen here. We were just colonized by other European countries, and then, we revolted and we became our own country. So it's important that we remain our own country. Otherwise, we lose out on what makes America, America. And, sometimes when you lose something, it's very difficult to get it back, if you can never get it back at all. So we need to be careful about our alliances here. That does concern me. It says here in regards to this organization, it was organized and led by an Irish tugboat worker named Daniel Keefe. The organization had as many as 100,000 members on the Great Lakes, the East Coast, the West Coast, and the Gulf Coast in 1905. From the outset, Keefe faced significant challenges, most notably the outright hostility to unions of Chicago's influential industrialists and the traditional anti-union leanings of longshore recruits from small Midwestern towns. Nevertheless, Keith successfully expanded membership in the newborn union to include large numbers of dock workers. Now, I do get concerned about this beginnings here, and here's why. Immediately when I read that he was Irish, and that concerns me there, because there were a lot of Irish people that came over here to the United States that were fascist. The Irish were not treated very well over in Ireland and in the UK and in the Wales, and they just were mistreated horribly, because the Irish were typically treated as almost like indentured slaves or servants, and some of them were indentured slaves or servants when they came over here to the United States, way back in the day, especially when we were colonies. But there are a lot of people that immigrated over here to the United States that were fascist and or socialist. Most of them were fascist. And unfortunately, there are a lot of Irish people that their mindset in terms of this time frame, the early 20th century, they associated with the Soviet Union at the time. So, which of course would have been the Russian Empire with the Tsar and everything. Because during this time, 1905, they had not had the Tsar, the Tsar had not been assassinated yet, neither had his family yet. So, it's just that there were a lot of movements in Europe and in the Soviet Union, the Russian Empire, at that time, in terms of, fascism, Stalin, and, that kind of thinking that, that all rich people are bad, and, it's, the underdog is always the underdog, and that's just not true. Do we have the underdogs in our society? Yes, for sure. But the great thing about the United States is that just because you are an underdog doesn't mean that you have to stay one. You can always do something new and better with your life. Like, you are in charge of your destiny. What concerns me about this guy is that he comes over from Ireland. So I don't know a whole lot about him, but it does concern me because they're not always, how do I describe this? They're not always for law and order. That's probably the best way I can describe it. So, is it okay to have a labor union? Yes. But sometimes, what we've noticed in times past, the majority of the labor unions and trade unions that we have looked at, the majority of them were founded by fascists, I'm losing my voice a little bit, fascists and anarchists. And so, what concerns me about that is that they're anti-government. It's like, well, if you're anti-government, why would you come to the United States? We have a government. We very much love our government. And our government is one of the best governments on the face of this earth. So, you kind of have to take this with a grain of salt. Yes, did he do a good deed? Yes, for sure he did. He founded a wonderful labor union. I just get concerned with this because of this time frame as well. Because do they have workers' rights? Yes, but workers' rights was very much in its infancy here. Not necessarily because there were all these evil rich people. Were there evil rich people? Yes, but they were few and far between. Most of these large companies took very good care of their workers. However, what you have to remember is that this is before OSHA. This is before there were set standards for safety in places of employment. And plus, you have to remember, this is right around the Industrial Revolution. So, there are a lot of things that were done back then that would never be done today. That's not to say that they were doing everything wrong back then. It's that when something is new, that's when you learn the do's and the don'ts of your industry. So there's a whole lot of, there's just so many things that goes into this. I'm trying to not overstate it and not harp on it. I'm just saying that it does concern me when you have an Irishman founding a union in the United States. Because a lot of them left Ireland because they hated what was going on in their country. Well, they come over here with that hatred and that jaded mindset is what I'm trying to say. Yes, they want a better future. Yes, they want new and brighter things, but what's the cost? See, sometimes whenever people come over here to the United States, and we still have this issue with immigrants and foreigners, unfortunately, whenever they come over here, unfortunately, their mindset is not for America. It's for criticizing America. They want what we have, but what they don't understand is the reason why we have what we have is because we don't think or act like them. Like, we don't run our country like any other country. But yet they want our wealth, they want our businesses, they want to do business here. It's fine to do business here, but you got to do it the right way. And I look at it this way, if someone wants to do business here in the United States, they need to be pro-America, not anti-America. It makes no sense to me why someone would want to do business here in the United States, but yet they're not pro-America. They're not pro the United States. However, I understand in a way why they do that, because they just want the money. They have problems with greed. So we know these things to be true. So I'm not stating anything new. This is not, something revolutionary. This has been going on a long time. It's basically your neighbor who doesn't have much, basically lives next door to you. They see what you have, they like what you have, and they get jealous. But instead of working hard for it, they just want to move in and mooch on. You know what I mean? That's kind of what has been happening for a long time. It's not always that obvious. It's not always that evident, because sometimes people like this, whenever they're founding something, they're the underdog. And so we tend to side with the underdog because we feel compassion for them. But you need to be careful who you side with, because just because someone should receive compassion, that doesn't mean that their thinking is correct. You know what I mean? Like, their situation could be very well good and true, that their work is not appreciated, they're not getting paid the right wages. However, if they're a fascist and they don't like the United States and they just want to rip our economy apart and punish the rich, I don't have much sympathy for that. None at all. My sympathy is still for them in terms of, hey, they need to have a better work environment, or, they need better wages, or they need to be paid what the employer said they're going to pay them. That's equality for everybody. But that, just because I understand what they're talking about with their work environment and their labor, that doesn't mean that I agree with all this other stuff that is possibly anti-America. That's very much a safety risk to the United States. So we need to be careful about these things and who we align ourselves with. That was my point. Because whenever I see that someone from another country comes over here like that, I get concerned. So we need to be careful, who, what, when, where, how, why. Just the basics. Just practice some basic due diligence. But anyway, this guy, he basically fought against, people that were just pro-big business. And he had every right to do that. Every right to do that. What gets my concern with labor unions is that they go up against these big businesses to destroy them typically, and to take all the money out of it. Well, that's greed. So big business is just that. It's big business. There's a lot of money in it, and people have every right to make money, however much that is. So it doesn't make sense to me why labor unions and trade unions, they go after the very people that own companies that are employing employees and just wanting these outrageous wages that make no sense. Now, we have discussed a different longshoremen's union and association in times past, and their wages were just ridiculous. They were getting paid as much as a doctor, like a general practitioner, like someone that's been to medical school. None of these people have been to medical school. I'm not aware that any of them ever have, or ever will, but they're basically making a lot of money for a job that shouldn't be paying that much. Do they and should they make good money? Of course they should. But their wages need to reflect their industry, and their wages need to reflect what they actually do for a living. Otherwise, it leads to inflation of goods, because these are people that kind of control our ports. And that's a big problem, because when they go on strike, it's a big deal. It'd be like if semi-truck drivers went on strike. Guess what? Walmart wouldn't have any goods to sell to you and to me. Neither would Target. Neither would CVS or Walgreens. Think about all these big box retailers that, they have to rely on truck drivers and also these ports. So, just think about how much control these unions have over our goods, over our lives, based on, what we consume. This is why this is an issue, and this is why we're going over this, because a labor union should not have that much control over the economy. It's not right. It's not right at all. They almost act like pirates at times with these things. And we see that here in Oklahoma. Now, in regards to the coast, the east and west coast, I do not know much about you guys' area. Please reach out to me and let me know if you've noticed anything in regards to inflation, price of goods, availability of goods, because you are the consumer and you have every right to have access to those goods. Here's another thing. You have a right to have access to those goods, but you also have a right to have fair trade. And what I mean by that is that, it shouldn't cost $10 for a gallon of milk, but milk is going up. Like the last time I went to the store to buy a gallon of milk, I think it was almost a little over $5, which is ridiculous. It's insane, and that's here in Oklahoma, where we have a lot of cows. And we milk a lot of our own cows here. So we have our own industries here is what I'm trying to say. So, whenever you have labor unions like this that control your goods, they control the transportation of those goods, they can totally suck you dry of your money based on saying, oh, well, we deserve all this money because we're the ones that are bringing you all these supplies and these goods that you consume. Do they bring us all this stuff? Yes, but they have no right to demand higher wages like this. It's one thing to have reasonable wages, but it's another thing to have, to demand higher wages, especially when we are currently experiencing inflation at a rate that I thought I would never see in my lifetime, to be honest. I thought the worst form of inflation was during, there was some inflation during Barack Obama, but during his presidency, but I think Jimmy Carter was worse on that. My personal opinion, but I kind of feel like things are just as bad with Jimmy Carter. I just think it's really sad. So anyway, we need to be aware of these things because you and I, if you're listening from the United States, just FYI, you're the consumer. And you have every right to decide what you pay for something. I'm not saying that, we can bargain like they do in Mexico or other countries like that, but I'm saying that, the consumer, we need more rights. Because there are way more consumers than there are labor unions and people that are unionized. So just recognize that, whoever you enable to control your waterways, your oceans, your highways, your airways, your traffic ways, whatever the case may be, whoever you allow to control that is who can control how much money you spend or do not spend. More than likely, they will control how much you spend. And they will use any excuse in the book to get you to pay more money. So just be aware of that, because that's why some of these labor unions, should they have control over certain things? Yes, I totally agree with that. But in regards to the actual products and affecting our economy, no, that's not right. Because, whatever happened to that phrase, we're all in this together. See, labor unions, they don't believe that we're all in this together. They put themselves above other people because they think their labor is more important than everybody else's, which we know that is not true. Their labor is not more important than mine or yours. It's equality. What's interesting is that labor unions will try and use the federal court system to go after somebody, but yet they don't want to acknowledge that, under federal labor laws, we have equal opportunity in this country, but they don't see themselves as equal to us in terms of labor, so they really don't believe in equal opportunity. So just be aware of that, because I'm getting a drink of water here. That's what that crinkling noise is my bottled water. But let me get a drink real quick. Hold on. I think it's like over 100 degrees right now here in Oklahoma. It's very humid. And the air has gotten really dry. So anyway, I'm having a little bit of allergies. I was doing some gardening the other day. I should have worn a mask, but I didn't. But anyway, so here's the thing. I'm bringing this to mind, and I'm bringing this up in terms of a point because, in regards to these labor unions, because, we have the Department of Labor. We have labor laws that apply to our labor equally at a state and federal level. The problem that I've noticed with labor unions is that they can have great intentions, wonderful intentions, but they get so far off track in making other people suffer that are not in a labor union by making it seem like their labor is more important than everybody else's. Well, that creates favoritism and nepotism within the workplace and within the economy. So that's not right, because that's not equality. I think it's very difficult for any of these employers that have laborized labor. I think it's very difficult for them to implement equal opportunity when these labor unions do not believe in equal opportunity. They think the money should go to them. And they think that they should make as much as a medical practitioner, like a medical doctor, someone, just FYI, someone that's a doctor, like an MD, that means they went to school, like college, like a bachelor's degree for 4 years, and then they went on to medical school for 4 years, so that's 8 years right there. Then they do a residency, I think of up to 2 to 10 years. So let's say they just do the 2 years. Let's say they're not becoming a specialist, they're just becoming like maybe a GP or something like that. Still very specialized, but not as specialized as like a brain surgeon, right? Well, let's say you're just becoming a GP or something. That's 10 years of schooling after someone graduates from high school. That's why they make more money than the average person. It's because they were out of the labor force for the first 28 years of their life. They didn't go to work right away. They went to school, and very intensive school. So it's one of those things that if someone's trying to make as much money as a doctor, but their labor doesn't match what they do, or the education doesn't match that, I have a problem with that in terms of labor unions. Now I'll say this. If you own your own company and you're very successful, let's say you go on Shark Tank or something and you sell a really awesome good, and let's say 2 or 3 sharks invest in you, that's great, that's wonderful. You have every right to make as much money as you want. Because more than likely, you're not going to put yourself in a labor union. You see, that's why the private sector is way more stable than the public sector, which is the government. And the private sector is way more stable with less unions operating in it. Because labor unions tend to function like a federal government. That's why there's so much manipulation over wages, work hours, and things like that. Now, mind you, again, labor unions have done a lot to bring about excellent working conditions. They have done a lot. But I want to mention this. There have been employers in times past that they already cared about their employees. You know what I mean? Like, they didn't have to have a labor union. They were already implementing different things within their company. Some of these companies, I can't think of them off the top of my head, but one of them was a hospital or something. They implemented life insurance, then health insurance, and something else. Like, they did this all on their own. It wasn't through a labor union. And it wasn't through the government. It was just something they wanted to do to help their employees because they saw a need. So, there are different things that different industries do to compensate their employees for things that they need help with, whether at the job or outside the job. At the job, of course, is on-job training, getting promoted, things of that nature. Outside the job is making sure that your employees are covered via health insurance, like long-term care, short-term disability, long-term disability, life insurance, health insurance, 401k, things like that. These are things that employers were already doing before labor unions came about. It's just that you have these select few bad companies that made everybody look bad in terms of the wealthy. And I'm not siding with the wealthy, and I'm also not siding with the poor. I'm saying that you need to look at both sides to this, because the problem is sometimes people put all their eggs in one basket and they think, well, only the rich are correct, or they say only the poor are correct, or they say only labor unions care about labor, or they say only the government cares about labor or about the workers. Here's the thing. All of those examples, all those things I just mentioned, every single segment of the population, I should say, has made a mistake. They've made mistakes over the years. No one is exempt from that. But what's important is that we learn from our mistakes and we move forward. See, because here's the thing, there's some people that think the federal government is perfect, never makes any mistakes whatsoever. Well, have you seen how many lawsuits have been filed against the federal government over the years? There have been quite a few. Quite a few. And these are just the lawsuits that could go to court. There are many, I cannot say that enough. There are so many lawsuits that should have been brought against the federal government, and it's different agencies, but the person that wanted to file the lawsuit that had been wronged could not afford to file the lawsuit. Because you got to remember, we've talked about this in times past, the federal government has an endless supply of money. Why? They have our currency, they have their own printing press, and they have our tax dollars. So they have an endless bucket of money. So if you fight the federal government, you've got to have millions of dollars basically to defend yourself or to fight them. So just recognize that the lawsuits that are currently out there against the federal government, that's not nearly all of them, not even close to how many people actually want and should sue the federal government. Because if the federal government has done something wrong, you should take them to court. That's what court is for. That's just how our system works, and it works pretty well. It does have some flaws, but our judicial system is one of the nicest ones on the face of this earth. Other countries, they may not even give you a trial. They might just arrest you and throw you in jail or torture you or execute you. I think people need to realize, the United States, are we perfect? No, but we've got it pretty good. And we do a pretty good job of defending the poor and the innocent and the victims. So we need to make sure that even though we do have our problems here in the United States, we still do a good job of helping people. We really do. But anyway, that's a side note to that. But let's jump down in a little bit to this history. So it says here, as the start of the 20th century loomed, the ILA had approximately 50,000 members, almost all on the Great Lakes. By 1905, membership had doubled to 100,000, half of which were scattered throughout the rest of the country. ILA leaders focused on eliminating independent stevedoring firms, I don't know what stevedoring is, and securing closed shop contracts. Okay, so this is a contract issue. Keith bargained with employers, guaranteeing uninterrupted work in return for badly needed improvements in working conditions and wage increases. Okay, so what you need to remember with longshoremen is that their work was not guaranteed. So this is one reason why the labor unions were really good at recruiting members, because this type of work, it was not your typical Monday through Friday 40-hour work week. You may be only guaranteed one day of work or a week work. I mean, there wasn't a guarantee. Well, here's the thing. How are people supposed to feed their families? So it was a very, I would say, an uneasy job, I would say, to live with that. So that's why this gentleman, Daniel Joseph Keefe, that's why he went to bat for these people, because there were needed improvements. I will admit to that. There were definitely needed improvements, because no one should be left without work, especially if you need work and you want to work. That's a very wonderful thing to have a good full-time job and that you have access to really good income and benefits. That's very important. So I'm going to move down to about, there were allegations of organized crime. So I'm not going to read through every little thing because it's going to be quite lengthy. But basically, the longshoremen, they've had problems with organized crime because you're dealing with the waterfront and you're dealing with goods. So it says here, longshoremen obtained work through a shape up, is what they call it. And it's where it's day labor, what we talked about before. It says shape up, in which bosses chose a workforce on a daily basis. Longshoremen often worked only a day or less per week. As a consequence, work was especially uncertain for those who unloaded trucks and had to appeal to gangsters who controlled this work for employment. So I'm not surprised that this happened, especially up north in regards to New York City and things like that, because organized crime, especially Italian families, nothing against Italian families, I'm just stating a fact, so don't get huffy and puffy, Italian families controlled a lot of goods from Italy, specifically wine, olive oil. Those are the two big ones there. They controlled a lot of that. They also had access to drugs that they would bring in through the ports. So, being that these families had those type of products being brought into the country, they could very much control the labor. So, if a person had a hard time finding labor, they knew they could go to a gangster and basically say, "Hey, I need employment. What can you do for me?" Which is really sad that they would do that, but it just is what it is. So it says here, the ILA strove to clean house and rid itself of the few members who had, in fact, been proven corrupt or criminal. In August 1953, the ILA was suspended from the American Federation of Labor, which was a devastating blow. The AFL created the International Brotherhood of Longshoremen to replace the one that had been basically disenfranchised. And they scheduled different elections for them to move forward. So they've had scandal, they've had rivalry, they've had a lot of issues with that. In regards to government oversight, it says in 1953 the states of New York and New Jersey entered into an interstate compact with congressional approval that established a waterfront commission responsible for regulating the ILA by preventing individuals with a criminal record from holding positions within it. The Labor Management Reporting and Disclosure Act, passed in 1959, imposed similar restrictions on all private sector unions. So, I find it very interesting that, how do I describe this? We have private sector unions, but they do not function in a private sector manner. They try and function as a public sector union per se, but yet there's still corruption within it. So these unions, they do have some problems with this. So it's very unfortunate. So you've basically got several different people with their hands in the pie. And it's always the worker that suffers, like whoever's at the bottom of the totem pole. So, there's a reason why they were banning people that have a criminal record from being involved in these things, because they could not take the risk of having more criminal involvement, which is very unfortunate. I mean, that would be like hiring someone that went to jail for embezzlement and you're hiring them to be your accountant. That would not make sense. Like you would never do that. At least I hope not. Now, in terms of political activities, it says the ILA conducted boycotts aimed at trade with the Soviet Union during periods of crisis, such as the Soviet invasion of I can't even say Afghanistan. It says the Supreme Court ruled in 2 companion cases in the 1980s that the union's boycott could not be enjoined under the Norris LaGuardia Act, but that it was an unlawful secondary boycott that could be outlawed on that basis under the Taft-Hartley Act, which we've discussed the Taft-Hartley Act in times past. So just to kind of give a little reminder here that the Taft-Hartley Act, that's what it's known as, but it was originally the Labor Management Relations Act of 1947, and it is a United States federal law that restricts the activities and power of labor unions. So it's very important that we remember that there are laws on the books for a reason, and that, especially in regards to labor unions, it's almost like having a nation within a nation with these labor unions. That's one thing that concerns me, because sometimes they act like they are their own country. And it kind of reminds me of the Indian tribes here in the United States, where they've basically been given permission to be their own nation within the United States, which is not right. It's one thing to give someone land, but I think to acknowledge them as their own nation, that's a huge problem. It's been a huge problem here in Oklahoma, because they've been allowed to have basically their own little nation or country or whatever within our state. They have their own law enforcement, and they don't protect civilians. Like, they don't care what happens to you if you're not part of their tribe. And even so, there's so much more domestic violence within Indian tribes than in any other segment of the population in the United States. So that's very unfortunate. So my concern in regards to labor unions is that they act like they are their own country, and they're given permission to do certain things that they should not be given permission to do. On the good side of this is that there are laws that have been passed to try and control them and to say, hey, you have to act this way. You have to do business this way, because basically what labor unions are going to do is they basically want to get a bunch of people within their association and then have them be workers at these different places of business just to try and take them over. That's not right. That's called basically infiltrating. And I feel sorry for employers that have this issue, because I have no doubt that employers are wholeheartedly hiring people to do the job and do it well. And every job has risk. I'm not ignoring that. I'm not ignoring that at all. Where I get concerned is where you have labor unions that it's like they just think it's all about them, and that it's not about the employer. And what they forget is that the employer is also a worker. Like, whenever these people own a company, they themselves are a worker. They're putting their monies on the line. If they have purchased any licenses or any accreditations, so to speak, they're putting all of that on the line to run their company. And they also are, they have to purchase a lot of insurance, for liability purposes, even back during these times, during the early 20th century. So there are some people that they just don't understand what it means to own a company. They don't understand balancing books. They don't understand accounts payable, receivable. They don't understand bank statements. They do not understand tax laws in regards to running a company. There's many different ways to run a company in terms of taxes. I mean, there's corporations, LLCs, C Corp, S Corp. I mean, there's all these different ways. So, our tax code for sure in the United States is not simple. It's very much complex. And, it's one of those things that I wish more people were aware that whenever someone owns a company, doesn't matter whether it's small, medium, or large, there's a lot of responsibility that goes into that. So just because someone owns a company, that doesn't mean it's all peaches and ivory at the top, although sometimes that does happen. But, just acknowledge that the owner and the higher-ups, they are workers as well. They have workers' rights. Why? Because of the Department of Labor and also equal opportunity employment. So I just wish more people would understand those things and actually read your laws. One thing that I did years ago in my 20s, and I'm not saying I'm old, I'm only 38, but I just remember reading the Constitution of the United States when I was in middle school, and then it dawned on me I need to read the Constitution of Oklahoma, and so I read that Constitution in my 20s. And I started to understand things better. Because when you know your labor laws and you know your rights, just your basic rights and the general rights that you have as a citizen, not only as a citizen of the United States, but as a citizen of your state, then you understand things better and you understand the do's and don'ts. And also, when you're more educated like that, you recognize when you have a government that's out of line, and then you also recognize when the government is just doing its job, they're not doing anything wrong. You also recognize when an employer has really screwed up and they don't want to take responsibility or have accountability. On the other side of that coin, you also recognize when an employer is actually trying, like they're trying to make things better. So it's one of those things that if you're not educated, if you don't understand your rights as a citizen of the United States, if you don't understand the labor laws of this country, you're really putting yourself at a disadvantage, especially, I would say if you're in a labor union or if you're not in a labor union. I was going to say if you're not in a labor union, but there are so many people that I've met over the years that are in labor unions, they don't have a clue what it means to be American. They think they do, but they don't. See, they think that being American means that you can be in a labor union and your work is more important than somebody else's. That's not what it means to be an American whatsoever. To be an American means that you're free. You're free. We have freedom here. That's the foundation of our country is freedom. That's probably the number one reason why people come to the United States is for freedom. It's not so they can have favoritism, typically. Unless you have fascists, like I said, coming over here from Europe and from other countries. That always concerns me with that because, fascism did not start here in the United States. It immigrated over here with people, with disgruntled workers that came over here. I understand. I just want to say this. I understand why they were disgruntled. I probably wouldn't be happy if I was in their shoes either about things that were going on during these different time frames over in Europe. But at the same time, I wouldn't bring that baggage over here and shame and blame the very country that I'm trying to be a part of by immigrating over here. It just doesn't make sense to me. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. It would be like starting a new job at a new wonderful company, but you're negative all the time because you're still comparing everybody to the previous company that you worked for. And so the new wonderful company that you work for, it's like they can't do anything right because all you ever see is everything that they do wrong, but only because you're not looking at your new job opportunity from a positive lens. You're looking through a very tainted lens on your camera. So I think there are times that we need to change what lens we are looking at these different situations, because I would rather look at something from a positive point of view as much as possible, even when it's difficult, as opposed to being negative and just thinking there's no hope, everybody's bad, everybody's evil. It never pays to be negative. That doesn't mean that you can't correct somebody, and that doesn't mean that you can't give someone constructive criticism. Constructive criticism, and I'll close with this, constructive criticism means that you actually care about the person. You want to see them do better. The other type of criticism is the type where you're just beating someone down with your words, and you really don't care that they get better, and you don't care that the situation improve. You just want to be right all the time. Well, that doesn't help. It actually destroys your relationships, whether it's business or personal or acquaintance, whatever the case may be. So, there are things that we need to focus on as a nation and as a country. And I think that the more that we focus on our individual rights, instead of just focusing on these different groups and saying, oh, they should get more rights, oh, they're the victim. No. We were not founded on victimhood. We were founded on freedom in this country. So if you focus on the good of the land, then that will help out more people than this other divisive stuff that's going on in our country right now. I still feel like our country is divided. I think a lot of people are frustrated. I know I get frustrated with stuff. And if you've heard this podcast and if you've listened to previous episodes, you've probably heard me raise my voice and get really irritated or get frustrated about stuff. In that same token, I understand what it's like to love your country, live in your country, but be frustrated a little bit, or even a lot, about the different things that just don't make sense. So the way that I handle this stuff is I just look at the facts. If someone's listening and they don't agree with me and they want to message me, go right ahead. Freedom of speech, I'm all for it. I love to hear, people of different opinions because, there might be something that they say that I didn't think of before. You know what I mean? So I think it's important that even if we disagree, we still need to come together for fellowship. We really do. Because that's what it means to be, an American, is that, we can have a difference of opinion, but that doesn't mean that we should be divided. Opinions are not a valid excuse or reason to hate somebody or to be divided away from somebody. That's not an excuse. Our country was founded by people that, everybody had their own opinion, but they came together to fight against a nation, which would be the United Kingdom, Great Britain. They fought against a monarchy, like they risked their lives, even though they had a difference of opinion about industry and things like that. They came together on what they could agree on and what they did agree on, and they founded this great nation. I think sometimes people live in la land when they think that, people should never disagree. That is so foolish to think that way, because one of the ways that you improve your country is to disagree. And let me explain that real quick. It's very difficult to move forward if you're always remaining at the same level. You know what I mean? If you never change, if you never push forward, if you never embrace new possibilities, and you never strive for a better future. Sometimes you have to have a difference of opinion. And sometimes that means you're not going to like somebody, you may not get along. However, it's in those moments that you recognize, hey, I actually do understand their point of view. I actually do understand their point of view. Or maybe they understand your point of view. But that doesn't mean that you completely change who you are. Or that you expect the other person to completely change who they are. That's not being respectful of the other person. You know what I mean? So it's important that we come together and even though I don't necessarily agree with every little thing about, this labor union, this association, they did help to bring about better workers' rights within this industry. And this industry definitely needed some help because it had inconsistent hours, it had inconsistent work, probably dangerous work, and it was riddled with organized crime at one point in time. Which is why, one of the reasons why the federal government intervened and said, hey, in order to be functioning as a good labor union, you cannot have people like this that have had a criminal record because it's going to taint your labor union. And, if you're dealing with money at all, that's a problem. So, but needless to say, there's a rhyme and reason for everything. It's just we need to not, how do I describe this? We need to not think, oh, these people are completely right about everything because they work in this field, they're always right, they can't do anything wrong. Not the case. That's not the case in any industry. That's not the case in any labor union. That's not the case in any company in the private sector. Sometimes we fall into this trap of all or nothing. We fall into this trap of you're either for me or against me. That's not true. Like there are people I've met over the years that I don't agree with them. I may or may not like them, as a person, like their personality, but I'm not against them. You know what I mean? Like you can have a difference of opinion and you can like or dislike somebody and you just live in community, you just get over your sweet little self, as they say. And you just live in harmony as much as you can. Now that doesn't mean la land or fantasy land. We need to live in realville and acknowledge things. I'm just saying that when it comes to labor unions like this and labor unions in general, labor unions are not perfect, far from it. In fact, they have caused a lot of problems. On the other side of that coin, they've done a lot to help with our labor force and have good, consistent hours and have good pay. So, we need to look at the entire picture, which is what this show, what we try to do. We try to present the facts in a way that says, hey, this is what it is, but please don't be jaded about it. Regardless of whether you agree with it or not, these are the facts. Here's the good, the bad, the ugly, as they say. I love Clint Eastwood movies, so that's why I say that. But needless to say, it is a good labor union, but it's also a bad labor union. It's kind of in the middle. I'm in the middle on this one because I'm not so sure about their founding because of that guy that's, Irish or whatever. And also, they control some ports, which controls goods, which affects our pricing here in the United States. And we've had problems with inflation. So I get very concerned with that because inflation, to me, there's no excuse for inflation. I think when you have a stable country and a stable economy, your market should reflect that. But our markets are not as good right now as when, President Reagan was in office. There were some years that President Clinton was president, and they had some good money times then. I don't remember the first George Bush, but I remember the second George Bush. Gas prices were great until 9/11 happened. We had a catastrophe. But in terms of our economy, we were doing great. We were doing really good. During Obama's time, I noticed that my health insurance went up 300% in terms of the premium cost. So my health insurance did not get cheaper. It went up, it skyrocketed, and there were less and less doctors in my network. So I for sure did not feel very blessed because of Obamacare or because of some of the decisions he made. And again, he may care about the United States, but I personally think and believe he went about it the wrong way. He tried to implement socialized medicine. And that's not right, because we are not a socialized country. Like, we're not Britain, we're not France. We don't have that kind of government, and we don't have that kind of healthcare system. So if we don't have that kind of government, if we don't have that kind of healthcare system, why would you try and implement something like that? You know what I mean? Like, his heart may have been in the right place, but his decision making was not. So very unfortunate, because he doesn't understand the private sector, but then again, he's a lawyer. I think we need to be careful whenever we elect lawyers, because I don't think they have good or proper judgment for running a country or a company. They tend to play this cat and mouse game with their decision making, and it's almost always the other person, not them, that is the mouse. And, our country suffered because of some of his decisions, or lack of decision making, or lack of good decision making. I think that's very unfortunate. The one thing I do like there are several things I like that President Obama did. He really tried to help workers get better pay, and he tried to help workers with it had to do with job titles, and having employers clearly state what their employee's job title is, so that way their job title could reflect their pay. Now, that was to help workers get paid more. However, here in Oklahoma, in an at-will state, it didn't pan out that way. The employer I was working for at the time, they did everything they could to change your job title so that your pay would reflect a lesser job title. So even if you were, let's say you had a nice fancy title, but you didn't make that kind of money. Well, instead of paying you more money for the work that you were doing, also to match the job title that you had, the employer just demoted you. That's what I saw happen here in Oklahoma. So, like I said, Obama, his heart may have been in the right place, but he doesn't understand the private sector. He doesn't understand business. And that's because he went to law school. He did not study the type of law that I think you need to study if you're going to be president, because he doesn't understand the private sector. At least he didn't during his terms as being president of the United States. And that showed in his basically lack of diplomacy towards the United States, because sometimes it sounded like he hated the United States whenever he would talk about us, about the country, and whenever he would be dealing with other leaders, it just sounded like he wasn't reliable. I mean, he came across as a weak leader. Even other countries stated that, and that really broke my heart, because I think that whenever you are a leader, you need to lead. And people need to know, hey, that person's a leader. I don't think very many people were impressed with him at all in terms of his leadership. If anything, it was lack of leadership that he showed, and I think that's very unfortunate. But I will go ahead and end this podcast. For the next podcast or episode, we're going to go ahead. I'm just going to go ahead and finish up the rest of these unions. So I think there's like maybe 10 to 15 of them. I'm going to double check and make sure we don't duplicate any of them. But I think there's like 10 to 15 that are. Let me double check this, because there's a couple of different lists. These are AFL-CIO affiliated labor unions that we're taking a look at. The next list of labor unions are going to be Change to Win Federation ones, which some of these we've already done. So it's one of those things like, that's why I always like to let you guys know who they are affiliated with, because sometimes they are affiliated with multiple organizations. So that's why I want to make sure that there's no duplication. So, because this list is divided out based on who they are affiliated with. And so, the next list we'll take a look at is the Change to Win Federation, and then we'll take a look at independent labor unions, which there's quite a few here. There's national labor unions, and these were really neat to look at. I've looked at a lot of these already. I think it's wonderful, all the independent labor unions that we have that are national. I think that's great, because to me, that's more American than doing the international labor unions. That's what I like about it. And then you have state and local associations and labor unions. I really like those myself, because I think that's a great way to get involved in your community and really support your countries and your you're helping out locally and you're noticing something local. And so you're able to help out, how to describe this? You're able to help out your neighbor in a way that an international union cannot. International unions are very much, I'm not saying they're disorganized, it's just that they have very big goals and big dreams, so to speak. And so whenever you have an international union like that, it's like the little guy gets lost in the shuffle. So that's why I prefer these national unions and these local unions better, because they do more within the community that you and I actually live in. You know, whenever we hear about these international labor unions or whatever, you know, it doesn't really directly impact us because it's at an international level. These local ones and these national ones, I bet when we go over these, you're probably going to recognize those more, because these people are ones that actually interact with our communities a lot more at a local and state level. That's why I like these better, the ones that are not international, because I personally think there's less greed in them. I think they do more at a local level, and they actually care about their neighbor. They actually care about people that are perhaps not even in labor unions. Because, you know, I think it's one thing to care about something, you know, that's based in another country. You're not really there. You're not really part of it. But when you are part of something that is local, you care about it. You're involved in it. You know what's going on. So it's one of those things that when people can get involved locally, more things happen. Like change happens quicker. Information gets out a lot quicker. People, you know, they unite a lot quicker. They understand each other a lot better. Because I feel like sometimes whenever something is an international association, there's just such a gap between the higher ups and I don't want to say the underlings, but everybody else. And I don't mean that negatively, that's just how some organizations are. But that's one reason why I really like these local organizations better, because you see more of the good work that they do. It's not just name only, you know what I mean? It's actual, you see the work of their hands, basically. And you see their goals and their projects, you see them come to fruition. So I think that's wonderful to see that. But I will go ahead and end this podcast, but as usual, until next time, I pray you're happy, healthy, and whole, that you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.